There's something powerful about understanding precisely what you're after in life. While other people my age drift through years with partners who refuse to take things seriously, I've maintained absolute clarity about my goals. Call it intelligent planning, call it maintaining standards. I call it refusing to become another warming story about people who surrendered their prime years to someone who kept them waiting indefinitely. Anyway, be sure to tap that like button if you're enjoying this content and hit subscribe if this is your first time here. I'm Emma, I'm 30, and this recounts the 12 months I spent with Derek, a person who demonstrated that sometimes the greatest gift someone offers you is revealing their true character when circumstances demand it most. I encountered Derek at Rachel's celebration gathering last year. He was 36, which immediately captured my interest because, finally, here was someone who theoretically had their life organized, not some 25-year-old still discovering their career path. Derek possessed this entire enigmatic quality, reserved, focused, the type of person who genuinely pays attention during conversations rather than simply anticipating their moment to respond. He maintained employment in some specialized technological sector that he'd elaborate on extensively whenever questioned. But I'll be honest with you, my attention wandered after the initial 5 minutes. What held significance was his steady income, independent residence, and apparent readiness for a committed future. Our third evening together was when I presented everything explicitly. We occupied this cozy Italian restaurant in the city center, and I recall thinking this represented the ideal opportunity for complete transparency regarding my relationship requirements. No manipulation, no indirect communication, just pure honesty about what I required from a partnership. Listen, I expressed to him while sharing our tiramisu, I have zero interest in squandering time. I expect an engagement ring precisely 12 months from today and a wedding ceremony within 6 months following that. I monitored his expression carefully. Most people would have reacted with shock or fabricated some reason about requiring the restroom, but Derek simply acknowledged thoughtfully, like I'd shared something entirely logical. I comprehend that schedule, he responded. You don't wish to become one of those relationships engaged for multiple years while he prepares himself for marriage. The reality that he grasped it instantly, that he understood my perspective without requiring me to detail the nightmare scenarios I'd witnessed my companions endure, I recognized I'd discovered someone exceptional. Finally, someone who valued a person with defined boundaries and expectations. Those initial months were genuinely flawless. Derek demonstrated attentiveness in this calm, reliable manner that felt distinctly different from the ostentatious individuals I'd previously dated. He'd recall minor details I'd mentioned, like my distaste for restaurants adding onions to salads, or how theater air conditioning always made me uncomfortable. He wasn't the type who constantly posted about our relationship or executed elaborate public displays, but he appeared reliably. He possessed this approach to organizing activities that was simultaneously considerate and mildly irritating. Everything required investigation and evaluation from multiple perspectives. Interested in a new dining establishment, he'd invest 20 minutes examining reviews and studying the menu digitally first. Arranging a weekend excursion, he'd develop contingency alternatives for the contingency alternatives, considering weather possibilities. It was endearing, I suppose, but occasionally I simply desired spontaneity. Still, I assumed the systematic nature indicated he'd demonstrate equal thoroughness regarding planning our engagement. By month 6, I was already mentally organizing our engagement celebration. I'd captured screenshots of ring designs and deliberately left my device visible, displaying them when he was present. I began following wedding photographers through social media and would present him images that attracted my attention. Just for future consideration, I'd mention with a smile, and he'd acknowledge and actually examine whatever I was displaying. The characteristic about Derek was his reluctance to make commitments casually. When he accepted my timeline, I understood he meant it genuinely. He wasn't the type to verbalize things merely to maintain peace or circumvent conflict. So when August appeared, 3 months preceding our anniversary, and I initiated more obvious suggestions about engagement, I anticipated him sharing my excitement about the approaching deadline. Instead, he seemed to grow more withdrawn. It manifested subtly initially. He'd require extended periods to respond to messages or appear distracted during our time together. Whenever I'd mention anything connected to our future, like how stunning winter ceremonies could be, or noting that Rachel was examining venues for her own wedding, he'd just acknowledge and redirect the conversation. I began worrying he was experiencing uncertainty. Here's the reality about people. They can appear completely supportive of something until the moment it materializes as reality. Then suddenly they require additional time or desire confirmation or whatever alternative justification they employed to avoid commitment. Bitterly, I'd observed it happen to excessive numbers of my companions, years wasted on individuals who discussed marriage extensively but conveniently never actually proceeded with proposing. But Derek had accepted my timeline. He'd maintained eye contact and expressed understanding. So either he was reconsidering marriage or he was reconsidering me. Both scenarios made my stomach twist with anxiety and anger. October materialized like a countdown mechanism, ticking increasingly louder in my thoughts. Our anniversary was November 15th. I'd been with Derek for nearly 12 months, and according to our understanding, I should be receiving an engagement ring in 6 weeks. I started monitoring his behavior more closely, searching for indicators that he was arranging something memorable. He wasn't. No mysterious communications or secretive gatherings with companions who might assist him planning a proposal. No sudden curiosity about my ring measurements or style preferences. No attempts to coordinate with my relatives or friends for a surprise. Nothing. It was like he'd completely disregarded the most significant conversation we'd ever experienced. I attempted more explicit suggestions. Rachel's engagement ring is stunning, but I think I prefer something more traditional. I'd mention while we watched television, or my parents are incredibly enthusiastic about the prospect of planning a wedding soon. Each instance, Derek would produce some non-committal sound and continue watching whatever program we had playing. The nearer we approached November, the more frustrated I became. This wasn't some casual suggestion I'd made months previously. This was a clear agreement about our relationship schedule. I'd been transparent about my expectations from the beginning, and he'd accepted them. Now he was behaving like he'd never heard of any timeline whatsoever. 2 weeks before our anniversary, I decided to test him. "So," I stated casually while we were preparing dinner together, "any special arrangements for the 15th? Derek appeared confused momentarily. "The 15th. Our anniversary?" I attempted maintaining my voice light, but internally I was screaming. "How do you forget your own relationship anniversary?" "Oh, right," he responded, like he just remembered he needed to collect dry cleaning. "I was thinking we could try that new steakhouse downtown, make a reservation for 7. A reservation at a steakhouse. For the evening, I was supposed to be getting engaged. I manufactured a smile and said that sounded great, but inside I was devastated. This was not the response of someone who was planning to propose in 2 weeks. This was the response of someone who had completely forgotten about the most important milestone in our relationship. That evening, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling while Derek slept peacefully beside me. How had I been so mistaken about him? He'd seemed different from all the other people who made empty promises about the future. He'd seemed like someone who actually followed through on commitments. But here we were, 2 weeks from our anniversary, and he was planning to take me to dinner like it was any other date night, not the night that was supposed to transform our entire future together. I started withdrawing emotionally. Not dramatically, I'm not the type to create scenes or issue ultimatums, but I stopped initiating conversations about the future. I stopped showing him wedding content on social media. I stopped mentioning rings or venues or anything related to the engagement that apparently wasn't happening. Derek noticed, of course. He started asking if everything was okay, if something was bothering me. But how do you explain to someone that they're failing to meet an expectation they'd agreed to months ago? How do you remind your partner that he's supposed to be planning the most important moment of your relationship without sounding desperate or demanding? So I just said I was fine. Work was stressful. I was tired. The usual justifications people make when they're disappointed but don't want to admit it. November 15th arrived on a Thursday. I woke up that morning with a knot in my stomach, still clinging to a tiny fragment of hope that maybe Derek had been planning something all along. Maybe he was just incredibly skilled at maintaining secrets. Maybe tonight would be the night that changed everything. I spent extra time getting ready, selecting a dress that would look beautiful in engagement photographs. I styled my hair and applied makeup carefully, just in case. When Derek picked me up, he told me I looked beautiful, but there was nothing in his demeanor that suggested this was anything more than a regular date night. The steakhouse was pleasant enough, quality food, decent atmosphere, nothing particularly romantic or memorable. Derek seemed relaxed and content, discussing work and inquiring about my day like this was any other dinner together. Meanwhile, I was sitting there in my carefully selected dress, waiting for some indication that he remembered what this night was supposed to represent. The check arrived. Derek paid, and we walked back to his vehicle. That was it. Our 1-year anniversary, the night I was supposed to become his fiancé, and he treated it like any other Thursday night dinner date. The drive back to my apartment was silent. I stared out the window, processing the reality of what had just occurred. Derek had forgotten, or worse, he'd remembered and chosen to ignore it. Either way, the message was clear. He wasn't ready to marry me. Maybe he never would be. "Thanks for dinner," I said when he walked me to my door. "It was nice." He kissed me goodnight, told me he'd call tomorrow, and drove away. Just like that. Like he hadn't just broken the most important promise he'd ever made to me. I went inside and sat on my couch, in my engagement dress, staring at my bare left hand. 1 year. I'd given him exactly what he'd asked for. Time to know me, time to be certain, time to plan something special. And he'd wasted it. The next few days were torture. Derek called and texted like normal, completely oblivious to the fact that our relationship had fundamentally changed. I kept my responses brief and polite, but I was already mentally disconnecting. If he wasn't serious enough about our future to honor the timeline he'd agreed to, then what was the purpose of continuing? My friends started inquiring about the engagement. Rachel had been so excited, already planning my bachelorette celebration in her mind. My mother had been dropping hints about wanting to help organize a wedding. Everyone who knew about our timeline was waiting for the good news. Instead, I had to keep fabricating excuses. He wanted to wait until after the holidays. He's planning something special for the winter season. You know how people are with timing. But inside, I knew the truth. Derek wasn't planning anything. He'd either forgotten about our agreement entirely, or he'd decided he didn't want to marry me after all. Both possibilities were equally devastating. A week passed, then 2. Each day without a ring felt like confirmation that I'd wasted 12 months of my life on someone who wasn't serious about our future. I was 30 years old. I didn't have time to waste on people who couldn't follow through on their promises. I started withdrawing more obviously. I stopped staying over at his place. I made plans with friends instead of spending every weekend together. I needed to protect myself from getting even more invested in a relationship that clearly wasn't progressing. Derek noticed the change and started trying harder. He'd suggest romantic date nights or weekend getaways. He'd bring me flowers or small gifts for no reason. But it all felt hollow now. These gestures would have meant something 3 weeks ago. Now, they just felt like too little too late. 3 weeks after our anniversary, Derek asked if we could talk. He seemed anxious, which was unusual for him. He suggested we take a walk along the shore, the same shore where we'd had one of our first serious conversations about the future. "I've been thinking about us," he said as we walked along the water, "about what you said when we first started dating." My heart started racing. Finally, he was going to acknowledge what had happened. Or rather, what hadn't happened. "I know our anniversary didn't go the way you probably expected, and I want you to know that it wasn't because I don't want to marry you." He stopped walking and turned to face me. And then, right there, on the shore, he got down on one knee and pulled out a ring box. "Emma, will you marry me?" I stared down at him. This person who was 3 weeks late to the most important moment of our relationship. The ring was beautiful, exactly the style I'd been hinting about for months. But all I could think about was how this should have happened weeks ago, how he'd let our anniversary pass without a word, then acted like everything was normal while I died inside, waiting for him to remember his promise. "No," I said. Derek's face showed complete shock. He'd clearly expected me to say yes, to be thrilled that he was finally proposing. But he was too late. The window had closed 3 weeks ago. "I can't marry someone who doesn't respect my timeline or keep their promises," I told him. I could see both our families in the distance. Apparently, he had planned this entire thing, invited everyone to witness what he thought would be our engagement. But I was done waiting for Derek to decide he was ready for the future we'd agreed on 12 months ago. "I love you," I continued, "but I can't be with someone who treats my expectations like they're optional." And with that, I walked away. I left him there on the shore with his ring and his shocked families, and I didn't look back. The aftermath was immediate and brutal. My phone started ringing before I even reached my vehicle. First my parents, then his, then Rachel, then what felt like every person who'd witnessed the proposal. Everyone wanted to know what had happened, why I'd said no, how I could walk away from someone who clearly loved me. "He proposed, Emma," my mother said when she finally cornered me at home. "Isn't that what you wanted?" 3 weeks late, I reminded her. "He agreed to propose on our anniversary, and he forgot, or ignored it. Either way, it demonstrates he doesn't take our relationship seriously." "But he did propose," she insisted. "Maybe he was planning something special or waiting for the right moment. Or maybe he only did it because I was pulling away and he could tell I was done. I'm not going to marry someone who only commits to me when he's afraid of losing me." The conversations with his family were even more difficult. Derek's sister Morgan called me, crying, begging me to reconsider. "She's been planning this for weeks," she said. "He wanted it to be perfect, not just rushed to meet some arbitrary deadline." But that's exactly the problem. It wasn't arbitrary to me. It was the timeline we'd agreed on, the promise he'd made, and he'd broken it. Reflective pause. My friends were divided. Rachel supported me, understanding how important the timeline had been to me from the beginning. Bitterly, but others thought I was being unreasonable, throwing away a good relationship over what they saw as a technicality. "He proposed," they kept saying, like that solved everything. "He wants to marry you." But wanting to marry me and respecting my clearly stated expectations were two different things. If Derek couldn't honor his commitments during our relationship period, what would marriage look like? Would he forget our wedding anniversary too? Would he always be 3 weeks late to the important moments in our life together? I stood my ground. The relationship was over. I'd given Derek exactly what he'd asked for, 12 months to know me and decide if he wanted to marry me. He'd had 365 days to plan a proposal for our anniversary. Instead, he'd waited until I was already disconnecting from the relationship to suddenly decide he was ready. That told me everything I needed to know about his priorities and his respect for my feelings. The hardest part was seeing how everyone else reacted. Derek's family treated me like I'd broken his son's heart over nothing. My own family kept pushing me to give him another chance, to stop being so stubborn. Even some of my friends started acting like I'd made a huge mistake. But I knew what I'd experienced. I knew how it felt to spend 3 weeks wondering if the person I loved had forgotten the most important promise he'd ever made to me. I knew how it felt to fabricate excuses to everyone who asked about our engagement, to smile and pretend everything was fine while inside I was falling apart. Derek tried reaching out several times over the following weeks. Texts, calls, even appearing at my apartment once. He wanted to talk, to explain, to try again. But I was done. I'd made my decision on that shore, and I wasn't reversing it. The truth is, his timing told me everything I needed to know. If he'd really been planning something special, he would have communicated that. If he'd needed more time, he should have asked for it instead of letting our anniversary pass in silence. Instead, he'd acted like our timeline didn't matter, like my expectations were just suggestions he could ignore. And when I started pulling away, suddenly he was ready to propose. That wasn't love. That was panic. That was someone who only valued something when he was about to lose it. I deserved better than that. I deserved someone who would be excited to marry me, not someone who had to be scared into proposing. I deserve someone who would remember our anniversary without needing to be reminded, who would honor his commitments because he wanted to, not because he had to. So I walked away. And despite what everyone else thought, despite all the pressure to change my mind, I knew I'd made the right choice. 8 months have passed since that night on the shore. 8 months of everyone telling me I made a mistake, that I threw away something good over a silly timeline. 8 months of being single while all my friends got engaged or married or moved in with their partners. I won't lie, it's been harder than I expected. Dating at 30 is different than dating at 25. People my age are either confirmed singles who have no interest in commitment, or they're divorced with complications I'm not interested in managing. The good ones are taken, and the ones who are available usually have obvious reasons why they're still single. I've been on dozens of dates, had a few brief relationships that fizzled out when I mentioned my timeline expectations. Apparently, most people find it intimidating when someone knows what they want and isn't afraid to ask for it. They prefer people who are willing to wait indefinitely for them to decide they're ready for marriage. But I'm not most people. I know my worth, and I know what I want. I want someone who will be excited to marry me, not someone who has to be convinced or pressured or scared into commitment. I want someone who will honor his promises because he wants to, not because he's afraid of losing me. Last month, I saw Derek at the grocery store. He looked different, happier, maybe, more relaxed. He was with a woman I didn't recognize, someone younger, with long auburn hair and one of those effortless smiles that some people just naturally possess. She was holding onto his arm like he was the most fascinating person in the world, laughing at something he'd said. They looked comfortable together, natural, like they'd been together for a while. I ducked into the next aisle before he could see me, my heart pounding for reasons I didn't want to examine. It shouldn't have bothered me. I was the one who ended things, after all. I was the one who walked away from his proposal. But seeing him with someone else, seeing him look so content, hit me harder than I expected. Later that night, I found myself scrolling through social media, looking for any trace of this new relationship. I found her easily enough. Her profile wasn't private, and she'd posted several pictures with Derek over the past few months. Beach trips, dinner dates, casual photos of them together, looking genuinely happy. The most recent post was from 2 weeks ago. A picture of her left hand showing off a simple, elegant engagement ring. The caption read, "He said yes. Can't wait to marry my best friend." My stomach dropped. Derek was engaged again, less than a year after I'd rejected his proposal. He'd found someone else and was ready to marry her. But if that's true, then what? Do I lower my standards? Do I accept that I might have to wait indefinitely for someone to decide I'm worth marrying? Do I pretend that my expectations don't matter, that I'm fine with whatever timeline someone else chooses for our relationship? I don't know how to be that person. I don't know how to stop wanting what I want, or stop believing that I deserve to have my needs respected in a relationship. So here I am, 30 years old and single, watching my friends get married and start families, while I'm still looking for someone who will love me enough to meet me halfway. Still hoping that somewhere out there is someone who will be excited to marry me, not someone who has to be convinced or scared into commitment. Maybe Derek was that person, and I was too stubborn to see it. Maybe his 3-week delay wasn't a sign of disrespect, but just human imperfection in the face of a big decision. Maybe I let my fear of wasting time prevent me from recognizing something real when I had it. Or maybe I was right to walk away. Maybe someone who truly wanted to marry me would have been counting down the days to our anniversary just like I was. Maybe someone who really respected my feelings would have communicated if he needed more time instead of letting me suffer through 3 weeks of uncertainty and disappointment. I honestly don't know anymore. All I know is that I'm still single, still searching, and still wondering if I made the biggest mistake of my life on that shore 8 months ago. But I can't go back now. Derek has moved on, found someone who makes him happy, someone who doesn't require detailed timelines or specific proposal dates, someone who was probably thrilled to get engaged whenever it happened, instead of disappointed that it didn't happen sooner. Bitterly, maybe that's the kind of person people actually want to marry. Maybe my expectations really were too high, too rigid, too demanding. Maybe I need to learn to be more flexible, more patient, more willing to let things happen on someone else's timeline. The truth is, I don't know how to be that person. I've spent my whole adult life knowing what I want and going after it. I've built my career, my friendships, my entire life around having clear goals and working toward them systematically. The idea of just waiting around for someone else to decide when they're ready for the next step feels like giving up control of my own life. But maybe that's what love requires. Maybe real relationships can't be scheduled and planned like everything else. Maybe I need to learn to trust the process instead of trying to control it. I just wish I'd figured that out before I lost the one person who might have been worth waiting for.